The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport's secure cargo facility hummed with mechanical precision at 2:47 a.m., casting stark shadows across endless rows of shipping containers and freight pallets. In the controlled chaos of overnight operations, where millions of dollars in cargo moved through automated systems and human oversight, one woman sat quietly at a corner workstation, her fingers moving across a tablet screen with methodical efficiency. To anyone watching, Rose Miller appeared to be just another night shift logistics coordinator, checking manifests and tracking numbers in the sterile environment of modern air freight operations. But in exactly 63 seconds, 3 federal air marshals would discover that their assumptions about the quiet woman reviewing shipping documents were about to cost them their professional reputations and force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about operational security. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cargo facility at Denver International Airport operated with the relentless precision of a machine that never slept. Conveyor belts moved packages with automated efficiency, while overhead cranes positioned shipping containers with mechanical precision that eliminated human error from critical operations. The air smelled of jet fuel, industrial lubricants, and the faint ozone scent that accompanied high-tech security systems. Operating at maximum capacity, Rose Miller had been working the night shift for exactly 3 weeks, arriving each evening at 11 p.m. and maintaining her position at workstation Delta 7 until dawn broke over the Colorado Plains. Her supervisor, Janet Richardson, had hired her through a staffing agency that specialized in temporary logistics personnel workers who could handle the detailed documentation requirements of international freight operations without requiring extensive background investigations or permanent security clearances. To casual observation, Rose appeared perfectly suited for the role. She was 34 years old, with shoulder-length auburn hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard-issue olive-green jumpsuit that all cargo facility personnel were required to display for easy identification. Her ID badge, clipped to her chest pocket, identified her as R. Miller, Logistics Coordinator, Temporary Assignment, with a photo that showed her looking directly at the camera with the neutral expression of someone accustomed to institutional photography. Her workstation consisted of 3 monitors displaying real-time cargo tracking information, a tablet for mobile manifest review, and a secure terminal connected to federal databases that tracked international shipping movements through multiple government agencies. The work required attention to detail, patience with complex documentation systems, and the ability to identify discrepancies that might indicate security concerns or regulatory violations. Rose performed these duties with quiet competence that impressed her supervisors without drawing unnecessary attention to her presence. She arrived on time, completed her assignments efficiently, and maintained professional interactions with other personnel without engaging in the casual conversations that characterized most workplace environments. Her colleagues assumed she was simply focused on her work, possibly saving money for college or supporting family members who required her steady employment. But Rose Miller's background included experiences that weren't reflected in her temporary employment file. For the past 7 years, she had served in roles that required capabilities extending far beyond manifest checking and cargo documentation. Her actual expertise involved operations conducted in locations where failure meant international incidents rather than shipping delays, where split-second decisions determined mission success rather than administrative compliance, and where survival depended on skills that civilian logistics coordinators were never expected to develop. Her current assignment represented what intelligence professionals referred to as deep cover assessment, a comprehensive evaluation of security vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure through extended observation and analysis. Rose wasn't checking manifest to ensure proper documentation. She was identifying patterns in cargo movement that might indicate security breaches, terrorist financing, or other threats to national security that conventional monitoring systems couldn't detect. The 3 federal air marshals who worked the overnight shift at Denver International had been watching her for the past week. Air Marshal David Chun, a 12-year veteran with experience in counter-terrorism operations, had noticed her consistent presence and began conducting informal surveillance to determine whether her behavior indicated potential security concerns. Air Marshal Rebecca Torres, 6 years of federal service, had reviewed Rose's employment documentation and found nothing that raised immediate flags, but her training emphasized vigilance regarding all personnel with access to secure areas. Air Marshal Michael Foster, the newest member of their team with 3 years of experience, had been assigned to conduct closer observation of temporary personnel as part of his ongoing professional development. Their interest in Rose had been heightened by several factors that didn't quite fit normal patterns for temporary logistics workers. She maintained situational awareness that exceeded job requirements, consistently positioning herself where she could observe multiple access points while performing her duties. Her movement patterns around the facility suggested familiarity with security protocols that temporary employees weren't typically briefed on. Most significantly, her work pace remained constant regardless of shift complexity or cargo volume, indicating either exceptional efficiency or access to information that simplified her decision-making process. Chun had noticed that Rose never seemed surprised by changes in cargo scheduling or security procedures that caught other temporary workers off guard. Torres observed that her computer usage patterns suggested familiarity with database systems that required clearances above her documented authorization level. Foster, whose responsibility included monitoring for insider threats, had documented behavioral indicators that warranted further investigation. What none of the 3 air marshals understood was that Rose's assignment at Denver International was part of a classified operation designed to evaluate airport security through controlled infiltration by personnel with specialized training. Her presence represented a test of their ability to identify potential threats among legitimate personnel, but the test parameters included variables they hadn't been briefed on. Rose's actual background included training in surveillance detection, counterintelligence operations, and close-quarters combat techniques developed for environments where conventional law enforcement methods proved inadequate. She had served in locations where her survival depended on maintaining cover identities while conducting operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged, where the difference between mission success and international embarrassment was measured in seconds rather than hours. Her current role allowed her to assess vulnerabilities in airport security while evaluating the competence of federal personnel assigned to protect critical infrastructure. The 3 air marshals watching her represented subjects in an evaluation process they didn't know they were participating in, and their performance would influence security recommendations for airports throughout the United States. At 2:46 a.m. Rose completed her review of manifest documentation for a series of shipments that had arrived on cargo flights from Eastern European destinations. Her analysis had identified discrepancies in weight declarations and routing, information that suggested possible smuggling operations, but protocol required her to document findings through secure channels rather than taking immediate action. She saved her work, locked her terminal, and began the process of ending her shift according to standard operating procedures. The 3 air marshals had been positioned throughout the cargo facility to observe her departure routine, expecting to conduct what they believed would be a routine security interview regarding her access to sensitive information. Chun approached from the main corridor. Torres moved to block the secondary exit, and Foster positioned himself near her workstation to review her computer activity after she departed. None of them anticipated that their attempt to detain a temporary logistics coordinator would result in a demonstration of capabilities that exceeded their combined training and experience. Rose Miller had been conducting her own assessment of their surveillance techniques for the past week, and she had concluded that their approach to security evaluation required significant improvement. In exactly 63 seconds, they would discover that their assumptions about the quiet woman checking manifests had been fundamentally incorrect, and that their careers in federal law enforcement were about to take a direction none of them had expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Air Marshal David Chun moved through the cargo facility's main corridor with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to federal authority in secure environments. His footsteps echoed against polished concrete floors as he approached Rose's workstation, his hand instinctively checking the position of his service weapon, a gesture that had become automatic after 12 years of federal service in situations where threats could materialize without warning. Behind him, the facility's security cameras tracked his movement through automated systems that recorded every interaction between federal personnel and civilian workers. Chun had reviewed the protocols for interviewing temporary employees, and his approach reflected standard procedures designed to gather information while maintaining operational security. He expected this would be a routine conversation that might reveal whether Rose Miller represented a security concern worth escalating to his supervisors. Air Marshal Rebecca Torres had positioned herself near the facility's secondary exit, a location that provided visual confirmation of all personnel departing the secure area while maintaining tactical flexibility if the situation required rapid response. Her 6 years of federal experience had taught her that most security interviews with temporary workers concluded without incident, but her training emphasized preparation for scenarios where routine interactions escalated unexpectedly. Torres carried herself with the alert posture of someone whose survival had depended on reading environmental cues correctly. Her position allowed her to observe Chun's approach while maintaining awareness of other personnel who might complicate the developing situation. She noted that the overnight shift had fewer witnesses than typical day operations, a factor that could work to their advantage if Rose's responses required further investigation. Air Marshal Michael Foster, the newest member of their team, had assumed responsibility for securing Rose's workstation after her departure. His 3 years of federal service had prepared him for standard evidence collection procedures, but his role in this operation represented his first opportunity to participate in a potential insider threat assessment. Foster approached Rose's computer terminal with the methodical precision of someone determined to prove his competence to more experienced colleagues. The 3 air marshals had coordinated their positions through subtle hand signals and radio communications that maintained their tactical advantage while avoiding obvious surveillance indicators that might alert Rose to their intentions. Their approach reflected federal training designed to control encounters with potential security risks through overwhelming professional presence and coordinated positioning. What none of them realized was that Rose had been tracking their movements. For the past 47 minutes, her peripheral vision had cataloged Chun's position changes, Torres's route selection, and Foster's preparation for terminal access. Her training in surveillance detection had identified their coordination patterns and tactical communication methods, allowing her to predict their approach timing with mathematical precision. The 3 air marshals believed they were conducting covert observation of a temporary logistics worker. In reality, they were being assessed by someone whose background included extensive experience in counter-surveillance operations. Rose's actual mission parameters included evaluation of federal personnel effectiveness in detecting potential threats within secure facilities. The 3 air marshals represented test subjects in a classified assessment designed to determine whether current training protocols produced adequate results in real-world scenarios. Their performance during the next few minutes would influence federal security recommendations for airports throughout the continental United States. As Chin approached her workstation, Rose continued reviewing manifest documentation with the same measured pace she had maintained throughout her 3-week assignment. Her fingers moved across the tablet screen with mechanical precision, but her attention was focused on calculating distances, identifying potential weapons within her immediate environment, and assessing the tactical capabilities of the 3 federal agents who believed they held all the advantages in this encounter. Her background included 7 years of operations, where maintaining cover identity meant the difference between mission success and international incident. She had perfected techniques for appearing completely absorbed in routine tasks while simultaneously conducting threat assessment and tactical planning. The skills that had kept her alive in hostile territories were now being applied to evaluate the competence of federal agents in their own secure facility. "Excuse me, Miss Miller," Chun said as he reached her workstation, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that federal agents use to establish immediate control over civilian interactions. "I'm Air Marshal Chun. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about your work here?" Rose looked up from her tablet with the neutral expression of someone accustomed to routine security procedures. "Of course, Air Marshal. How can I help you?" Her voice carried no indication of concern or surprise, despite her awareness that this interaction represented something beyond standard protocol. Chun consulted his notes, a gesture designed to demonstrate thoroughness while providing him time to assess her initial responses. "I've been reviewing your work patterns over the past week, and I noticed some irregularities that warrant clarification. Specifically, your computer access logs show database queries that exceed typical requirements for manifest verification." The question was designed to gauge her knowledge of systems she shouldn't have been trained to use, but Rose's response reflected preparation for scenarios where her cover identity required defensive explanation. "I've been cross-referencing shipment documentation with regulatory compliance databases to ensure accuracy. The training materials provided by my supervisor emphasize the importance of thorough verification procedures." Her answer contained enough technical accuracy to satisfy basic scrutiny, while avoiding details that might reveal the extent of her actual system access. Chun made notes on his tablet, but his expression suggested incomplete satisfaction with her explanation. Torres moved closer to their position, her approach designed to increase psychological pressure through the presence of multiple federal agents. Her movement patterns reflected training and interview techniques that used environmental control to encourage cooperation from potentially hostile subjects. "Miss Miller, your employment documentation indicates limited experience with logistics operations, yet your work quality suggests familiarity with systems that require extensive training. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Rose's response was delayed by exactly 3 seconds, long enough to suggest careful consideration, but brief enough to avoid indicating deception. "I've always been detail-oriented, and I spent considerable time reviewing system documentation during my first week. The software interfaces are intuitive once you understand the underlying logic." Foster, who had been observing from his position near the computer terminal, decided to contribute to the interview process. His inexperience led him to ask a question that revealed more about federal procedures than it gathered about Rose's activities. "Have you noticed any unusual patterns in cargo shipments that might indicate security concerns?" The question violated protocols designed to protect operational information from civilian personnel, but Rose answered as if she hadn't recognized the procedural error. "I've documented several discrepancies in weight declarations and routing information through standard reporting channels. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" Her response demonstrated knowledge of proper reporting procedures, while subtly indicating that she had identified potential security issues through legitimate channels. Chun exchanged glances with Torres, recognizing that their interview subject was providing textbook responses that neither confirmed nor eliminated their suspicions. What they didn't understand was that Rose's answers were calibrated to maintain her cover identity while gathering intelligence about their investigation methods and security protocols. Every question they asked provided her with additional information about federal training procedures, operational priorities, and tactical limitations that would influence her final assessment report. The interview had been proceeding for exactly 7 minutes when Foster made the tactical error that would transform a routine security conversation into a demonstration of capabilities that none of the 3 air marshals had anticipated. His attempt to assert federal authority over someone he perceived as a temporary civilian employee was about to reveal fundamental gaps in his understanding of threat assessment and tactical preparation. "Miss Miller," Foster said, stepping closer to her workstation with body language designed to intimidate through physical presence, "I think you need to come with us for a more detailed discussion about your activities here. Your answers raise questions that require resolution before you can continue your assignment." Rose set down her tablet with deliberate precision and stood slowly, her movements economical and controlled. She maintained eye contact with Foster while conducting final tactical assessment of all 3 agents, their positioning, their likely responses to resistance, and the environmental factors that would influence the outcome of what was about to happen. "Am I being detained?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying no emotion despite her awareness that the situation had just escalated beyond the parameters her mission briefing had anticipated. The question caught all 3 air marshals off guard because it indicated legal knowledge that temporary logistics workers weren't expected to possess. But by the time they recognized the implications of her response, Rose Miller had already begun the sequence of movements that would conclusively demonstrate the difference between federal training and special operations capabilities. The transition from verbal questioning to physical confrontation occurred with the mathematical precision that characterized all of Rose Miller's operational decisions. Foster's attempt to physically escort her from the workstation represented a tactical miscalculation that demonstrated fundamental gaps in federal training regarding threat assessment and escalation protocols. Rose's right hand moved to Foster's wrist with grip strength that immediately compromised his ability to maintain balance or execute defensive maneuvers. Her fingers found pressure points that his federal training had never addressed, nerve clusters that caused involuntary muscle responses independent of conscious resistance. The technique originated from combat systems developed for environments where traditional law enforcement methods proved inadequate against opponents with superior training or equipment. Foster's expression shifted from confident authority to startled confusion as he discovered that his attempt to control a civilian logistics worker had instead resulted in complete loss of tactical advantage. His federal training had prepared him for resistance from untrained civilians, but not for encounterment with someone whose background included extensive experience neutralizing armed opponents in hostile environments. The sound of Foster's impact with the concrete floor echoed through the cargo facility with enough force to attract attention from other personnel working the overnight shift. His service weapon remained secured in its holster, but his ability to access it had been eliminated through techniques that bypassed his defensive training entirely. Total elapsed time from initial contact to complete tactical control, 4 seconds. Chun reacted with the speed of someone whose 12 years of federal experience had included encounters with violent suspects, but his approach reflected preparation for conventional criminal behavior rather than contact with individuals possessing specialized military training. His hand moved toward his service weapon while simultaneously attempting to close distance for physical control, a combination of actions that violated tactical protocols designed to prevent exactly the situation he now faced. Rose pivoted on her left foot, using Chun's forward momentum against him while executing a redirection technique that sent him sprawling across a nearby cargo pallet. His weapon cleared its holster but never achieved target acquisition because his ability to maintain proper firing stance had been eliminated through manipulation of his center of gravity and spatial orientation. The shipping containers that surrounded their position absorbed the sound of his collision with steel framework, muffling what might otherwise have attracted immediate security response. Chun's radio clattered across the floor, its emergency activation button just beyond his reach as he struggled to process how a routine security interview had transformed into tactical engagement with someone whose capabilities exceeded federal training parameters. His 12 years of experience had never included scenarios where civilian personnel demonstrated superior combat proficiency against multiple armed agents. Torres, positioned near the secondary exit, had slightly more time to assess the developing situation and formulate an appropriate response. Her 6 years of federal service had included advanced tactical training designed for high-threat scenarios, and her reaction demonstrated better situational awareness than her male colleagues. Instead of attempting immediate physical intervention, she created distance while drawing her service weapon and acquiring target identification on Rose's center mass. "Federal agent, stop moving and put your hands where I can see them," Torres shouted, her voice echoing through the cargo facility with the authority of someone trained to control encounters through verbal commands backed by lethal force capability. Her weapon remained trained on Rose while her free hand reached for her radio to request immediate backup support. Rose raised her hands slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening, but her eyes continued scanning the environment for tactical opportunities that Torres's positioning might have overlooked. Her compliance appeared complete, but her posture suggested readiness for continued action if circumstances required alternative responses. "I'm going to need you to step away from my colleagues and move toward the wall," Torres continued, maintaining proper firing stance while attempting to control all variables in a situation that had clearly exceeded standard federal protocols. Her training emphasized securing suspects while preserving evidence and minimizing risk to innocent personnel who might be present in the facility. Rose began moving toward the indicated position, but her stride length and foot placement incorporated subtle adjustments that reduced Torres's tactical advantages while maintaining the appearance of full cooperation. Her background included extensive training in situations where apparent surrender served as preliminary positioning for continued engagement, techniques developed through analysis of scenarios where conventional compliance led to mission failure or personnel casualties. What Torres didn't understand was that Rose's mission parameters included provisions for situations where cover identity compromise required defensive action to protect operational security. Her response to federal detention would be guided by classified protocols that prioritize mission completion over personal safety or legal consequences that might result from unauthorized contact with law enforcement personnel. As Rose approached the wall position that Torres had designated, she maintained visual contact with both fallen air marshals while calculating distances, ammunition considerations, and response time for additional federal personnel who might be alerted by the disturbance. Her tactical assessment indicated that Torres represented the most immediate threat due to her weapon positioning and superior situational awareness, but the other two agents remained potential complications that required monitoring. Foster had begun extracting himself from his position on the floor, his movements indicating pain but not incapacitation. His attempt to reach his service weapon suggested that he hadn't yet understood the extent of his tactical disadvantage, a miscalculation that could escalate the situation beyond Torres's ability to control through verbal commands and weapon presence alone. Chun remained prone near the cargo pallet, but his hand was moving toward his radio with the obvious intention of requesting backup support that would transform a contained incident into facility-wide security response. His communication would likely trigger lockdown procedures that would complicate Rose's ability to maintain mission parameters while avoiding exposure of her actual operational status. Asterisk. The overhead security cameras had recorded the entire encounter, creating documentation that would require explanation through federal channels that weren't prepared for analysis of special operations, personnel conducting classified assessment missions. Rose's actions would be reviewed by investigators who lacked clearance for her actual assignment parameters, potentially compromising ongoing security evaluations at airports throughout the United States. "Ma'am, I need you to explain what just happened here," Torres said, her weapon remaining trained on Rose while her voice carried the controlled tension of someone managing a situation that had exceeded her training scenarios. "My colleagues attempted to conduct a routine security interview, and you responded with violence that suggests training far beyond civilian capabilities." Rose's response was delayed by exactly 5 seconds, long enough to suggest careful consideration of how much information she could reveal, without compromising operational security or violating classified disclosure restrictions that governed her mission parameters. "Your colleagues attempted to detain me without legal justification," she replied quietly, her voice carrying no emotion despite the tactical situation that continued to evolve around their position. "I responded with minimum necessary force to prevent unlawful detention." Torres's expression suggested confusion regarding Rose's legal knowledge and tactical capabilities, but her federal training emphasized securing suspects first and investigating discrepancies during subsequent interrogation procedures. Her priority remained gaining control over a situation that had demonstrated capabilities she hadn't been prepared to encounter. "You're going to remain in that position until backup arrives," Torres announced, referring to additional federal personnel who would respond to her radio request within approximately 12 minutes. "We'll sort out the legal aspects after we've secured this scene and ensured that everyone receives appropriate medical attention." But Rose Miller's mission briefing had included contingency plans for exactly this scenario, and her next actions would demonstrate why special operations personnel received training that exceeded federal law enforcement capabilities. The encounter that had begun with manifest checking was about to reveal operational realities that none of the 3 air marshals had been briefed to handle. In exactly 37 seconds, Torres would discover that her assumption about controlling the situation had been fundamentally incorrect, and that her federal training had not prepared her for contact with someone whose background included operations conducted in environments where failure meant international consequences rather than administrative review. The emergency lighting system in the cargo facility activated automatically as Rose initiated the sequence of movements that would conclusively demonstrate the difference between federal law enforcement training and special operations capabilities. Torres's assumption that maintaining weapon control provided tactical superiority was about to be challenged by techniques developed through analysis of scenarios where armed opponents required neutralization without causing permanent injury or fatalities. Rose's movement began with a subtle shift in weight distribution that Torres interpreted as compliance with her positioning commands. The Air Marshal's training had prepared her to recognize obvious aggressive movements, but not the preliminary adjustments that preceded advanced tactical maneuvers designed to exploit gaps in conventional defensive positioning. The overhead fluorescent lights reflected off polished concrete as Rose executed a rolling evasion that utilized the cargo facility's architectural features to break Torres's line of sight while simultaneously closing the distance between them. Her background included extensive practice in environments where cover and concealment meant the difference between mission success and casualties, techniques that civilian law enforcement training didn't typically address. Torres attempted to track Rose's movement while maintaining proper firing stance, but her federal training had emphasized static shooting positions rather than dynamic target engagement in complex environments. Her weapon discharge echoed through the facility as Rose's approach angle eliminated her ability to maintain accurate target acquisition while preserving safety protocols designed to prevent Collateral damage to critical infrastructure. The bullet impacted a steel shipping container approximately 18 inches from Rose's position, creating a spark shower that illuminated the tactical engagement while demonstrating Torres's difficulty adapting to unconventional threat patterns. Her 12 rounds of ammunition represented significant firepower, but only if she could achieve target acquisition against someone whose movement patterns had been refined through operations conducted in hostile territories. Rose's response to incoming fire incorporated techniques that utilized industrial equipment as both protection and tactical advantage. The cargo facility's conveyor systems, crane mechanisms, and shipping containers provided three-dimensional maneuvering opportunities that Torres hadn't been trained to anticipate or counter effectively. Federal shooting protocols assumed relatively open environments where suspects couldn't exploit complex terrain features for tactical advantage. Foster had managed to extract his service weapon despite his compromised physical condition, but his attempt to provide supporting fire for Torres demonstrated the coordination difficulties that arose when federal personnel encountered opposition that exceeded their training parameters. His shots reflected the accuracy limitations imposed by stress, pain, and tactical confusion rather than deliberate tactical decision-making. Chen's radio finally achieved connection with airport security dispatch, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of someone reporting an incident that had exceeded routine federal operations. Dispatch, we have shots fired in cargo facility Delta. Request immediate backup and medical support. We're dealing with a suspect who has demonstrated advanced combat capabilities. The radio transmission would trigger response protocols that brought additional federal agents, airport security personnel, and potentially military support, depending on threat assessment classifications. But Rose's mission briefing had anticipated this escalation, and her actions would be guided by operational priorities that considered broader security implications beyond the immediate tactical situation. As Torres attempted to re-establish weapon control while navigating between shipping containers, she discovered that her tactical training had not prepared her for pursuit operations in industrial environments against individuals with superior situational awareness. Rose's movement pattern suggested familiarity with facility layout that exceeded what temporary personnel should possess, indicating preparation that extended beyond her documented employment history. The cargo facility's automated systems continued operating despite the tactical engagement, creating ambient noise and movement that complicated Torres's ability to track Rose's position through auditory cues. Conveyor belts, hydraulic lifts, and climate control systems generated sounds that masked footsteps and equipment handling, providing acoustic camouflage that Rose utilized with practiced efficiency. Foster's attempt to coordinate with Torres through hand signals and radio communication reflected federal training designed for scenarios where suspects remained relatively stationary rather than conducting dynamic maneuvers through complex terrain. His positioning choices revealed gaps in tactical education regarding multiple opponent scenarios and environmental adaptation under stress. Rose's counterattack emerged from an angle that neither agent had anticipated, utilizing vertical positioning gained through climbing equipment that Torres had dismissed as irrelevant to ground-level tactical operations. Her descent incorporated techniques that allowed silent approach despite the industrial environment, demonstrating capabilities that suggested training environments far removed from conventional law enforcement scenarios. Torres's weapon was secured through grip manipulation techniques that prevented discharge while eliminating her ability to maintain tactical control. The disarmament occurred without injury, but with enough force to demonstrate complete tactical superiority over federal training methods. Foster's attempt to provide assistance resulted in a similar outcome, his service weapon secured through methods that bypassed his defensive reactions entirely. Both air marshals found themselves in restraint positions that rendered them unable to continue tactical operations while maintaining their physical safety according to protocols that Rose had obviously mastered through extensive practical application. Their federal training had not included preparation for encounters with individuals whose capabilities exceeded law enforcement parameters. Asterisk. The facility's security cameras had recorded the entire engagement, creating documentation that would require analysis by federal investigators who lacked briefing on Rose's actual mission parameters. The footage would demonstrate tactical capabilities that civilian logistics personnel weren't expected to possess, raising questions about her background that couldn't be answered through conventional investigation methods. Chun, still prone near the cargo pallet, but now able to communicate effectively with responding agencies, provided situation updates that indicated the need for specialized tactical support beyond standard federal capabilities. His reports emphasized that the suspect had demonstrated military-level training that exceeded civilian law enforcement preparation. Dispatch: suspect has neutralized 2 armed federal agents without causing serious injury. Request tactical team response and possible military consultation. This individual has capabilities that suggest special operations background. Chun transmitted, his voice reflecting professional assessment despite his compromised tactical position. The emergency response that his communication triggered would bring personnel trained for high-threat scenarios. But Rose's mission briefing had included provisions for contact with specialized tactical units. Her next actions would be guided by protocols designed to protect operational security, while minimizing international complications that might arise from misidentification of special operations. Personnel conducting classified assignments. Airport. Security Supervisor Patricia Williams arrived at the cargo facility 7 minutes after the initial shots fired report. Her response reflecting 23 years of experience managing security incidents in environments where federal jurisdiction complicated local authority structures. Her assessment of the tactical situation suggested professional capabilities that exceeded typical criminal behavior patterns. "Ma'am," Williams called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to de-escalating complex situations. "I'm Airport Security Supervisor Williams. I need to speak with you about resolving this situation without additional complications." Rose's response would determine whether the incident escalated to involve military, tactical teams whose intervention might compromise her mission objectives, or whether airport security protocols could provide resolution that maintained her operational cover while addressing federal concerns about her demonstrated capabilities. The cargo facility had become the center of a security response that would influence federal training protocols and airport security procedures throughout the United States. But the 3 air marshals who initiated the encounters still had no understanding of the classified assessment mission that had brought Rose Miller to Denver International Airport. In exactly 4 minutes, additional federal personnel would arrive with tactical capabilities designed to handle threats that exceeded conventional law enforcement parameters. And Rose would need to make decisions that balanced mission completion with operational security in an environment where her actions were being recorded for analysis by agencies that lacked clearance for her actual assignment. Airport security. Supervisor Patricia Williams approached the cargo facility's tactical engagement zone with the measured caution of someone whose 2 decades of experience had taught her to recognize when situations exceeded standard security protocols. The radio traffic she'd been monitoring indicated federal agents down and a suspect with capabilities that defied conventional threat assessment categories, circumstances that required immediate coordination with multiple agencies whose jurisdictional boundaries often complicated rather than simplified crisis resolution. Rose Miller maintained her position behind a row of shipping containers, her breathing controlled and her posture suggesting readiness for continued tactical engagement, despite her preference for resolution that would allow mission completion without further compromise of operational security. Her background included extensive training in de-escalation techniques designed for scenarios where continued violence would create international complications beyond the scope of local law enforcement capabilities. "Ma'am, I understand you've had a disagreement with federal personnel," Williams called out, her voice carrying the diplomatic tone that security supervisors used when addressing situations that might involve individuals with backgrounds they weren't cleared to fully understand. "I'd like to discuss options for resolving this without additional complications that could affect airport operations or passenger safety." The offer represented an opportunity for negotiated resolution that might preserve Rose's cover identity while addressing federal concerns about her demonstrated capabilities. Williams's approach suggested institutional experience with incidents involving personnel whose backgrounds included classified elements that couldn't be addressed through conventional investigation methods. Rose stepped into view with movements that indicated tactical awareness while demonstrating non-aggressive intent toward airport security personnel who weren't part of the federal operation that had initiated the encounter. Her hands remained visible, but her positioning maintained strategic advantages that would allow rapid response if the situation deteriorated beyond diplomatic resolution. "Supervisor Williams," Rose replied, her voice carrying the respectful tone appropriate for addressing local authority figures, while avoiding statements that might compromise operational parameters. "I responded to what I perceived as unlawful detention by federal agents who exceeded their authority in questioning temporary personnel." Williams nodded slowly, recognizing legal terminology that suggested knowledge of jurisdictional boundaries and civil rights protections that most logistics workers wouldn't possess. Her assessment of Rose's demeanor and tactical positioning indicated professional training that exceeded civilian backgrounds, but she maintained diplomatic neutrality while gathering information necessary for situation resolution. The sound of approaching vehicles indicated that federal tactical support had arrived in response to Chun's emergency communications, bringing personnel trained for high-threat scenarios that exceeded standard law enforcement capabilities. Williams understood that her window for diplomatic resolution was closing as additional federal agents prepared to establish tactical control over the entire facility. "Ma'am, we're about to have federal tactical teams entering this facility," Williams explained, her tone indicating genuine concern about escalation that could endanger airport personnel and operations. "I need to understand what happened here so I can provide accurate information to commanding officers who will determine how this proceeds." Rose's response required careful balance between operational security requirements and the practical necessity of avoiding tactical engagement with specialized federal units whose intervention would create complications extending far beyond airport jurisdiction. Her mission briefing had included protocols for situations where cover identity compromise threatened broader operational objectives. 3 federal agents approached me during my shift with questions that exceeded routine security procedures, Rose said, providing accurate information while avoiding details that might reveal the extent of her actual capabilities or mission parameters. When Agent Foster attempted physical detention without legal justification, I responded with minimum necessary force to prevent unlawful arrest. Williams made notes on her tablet while processing implications of Rose's statement regarding federal overreach and justified defensive response. Her security background included training in situations where federal agencies occasionally exceeded their authority, creating liability issues that airport administration needed to address through careful documentation and appropriate escalation. Procedures. The tactical vehicles that had surrounded the cargo facility carried federal agents trained for encounters with individuals possessing military-level capabilities, but their approach protocols were designed for hostile suspects rather than potential asset protection scenarios. Williams understood that misidentification could result in tactical engagement that would create far more problems than the current situation represented. Foster and Torres remained in restraint positions that prevented their interference with diplomatic negotiations while ensuring their physical safety according to protocols that demonstrated Rose's professional training and operational discipline. Their federal weapons had been secured and rendered safe, but their tactical communication equipment remained functional for coordination with incoming support units. Chun had maintained radio contact with federal tactical commanders, providing situation updates that emphasized Rose's demonstrated capabilities while requesting guidance on engagement parameters for individuals with potential special operations backgrounds. His reports indicated professional assessment rather than personal animosity, suggesting recognition that the encounter had revealed training disparities rather than criminal behavior. Tactical command, the advised that suspect has demonstrated advanced combat capabilities consistent with military special operations training. Chun transmitted to incoming federal units. She has neutralized 2 armed agents without causing serious injury, suggesting professional rules of engagement and specialized tactical education. The information provided tactical commanders with assessment data that would influence their approach procedures and engagement protocols when establishing control over the facility. Federal tactical doctrine included provisions for encounters with friendly assets, whose operational status couldn't be immediately verified through standard identification procedures. Williams received radio communication from Airport Command Center indicating that federal tactical units were requesting permission to establish perimeter control around the entire cargo facility, effectively closing airport freight operations until situation resolution could be achieved. The economic and operational implications required her to expedite diplomatic solution before federal jurisdiction expanded beyond manageable parameters. Ma'am, I need to ask whether you have any federal identification or credentials that might clarify your status with law enforcement agencies, Williams said carefully, recognizing that some personnel carried authorization that exceeded their apparent civilian roles. Information that could help me coordinate with incoming tactical units to prevent misunderstandings. Rose's response would determine whether she could maintain operational cover while avoiding tactical engagement with federal units, whose training might recognize special operations indicators that local security hadn't been briefed to identify. Her mission parameters included classified elements that couldn't be disclosed without authorization from command authorities who weren't immediately available for consultation. The cargo facility's security systems had documented the entire encounter through multiple camera angles that would provide federal investigators with tactical analysis of Rose's capabilities, movement patterns, and engagement techniques. The footage would be reviewed by personnel trained to identify military specializations through behavioral indicators and tactical proficiency demonstrations. Additional airport security personnel had established outer perimeter positions at Williams's direction, creating buffer zones between federal tactical operations and civilian airport staff, who might be endangered by escalation beyond diplomatic resolution. Their positioning reflected protocols designed to minimize disruption to airport operations while maintaining safety standards. During federal security incidents, the sound of tactical equipment deployment indicated that federal units were preparing for potential armed engagement with an individual whose capabilities had exceeded initial threat assessment parameters. Williams understood that her diplomatic window was measured in minutes rather than hours, and that failure to achieve resolution would result in tactical escalation that could compromise airport operations for days rather than hours. Ma'am, Williams said with increased urgency, federal tactical units are preparing to enter this facility with authority to use whatever force they deem necessary to resolve this situation. If you have any information that might prevent that escalation, now would be the time to share it. Rose Miller's next decision would determine whether her classified mission at Denver International Airport concluded through diplomatic channels that preserved operational security, or through tactical engagement with federal units, whose intervention would require explanation through command structures that extended to the highest levels of national security. Authorization. Rose Miller reached into her jumpsuit pocket with deliberate precision, her movements slow enough to avoid triggering defensive responses from Williams or the federal agents who maintained visual contact despite their compromised tactical positions. The item she retrieved appeared to be a standard employee identification card, but the metallic strip along its edge contained encrypted authentication data that would resolve the crisis through channels Williams hadn't been briefed to recognize. "Supervisor Williams," Rose said quietly, extending the card with the formal courtesy that characterized interactions between classified personnel and civilian authority figures. "Please scan this through your secure terminal and contact the number that appears on your screen. The person who answers will provide authorization codes that clarify my status here." Williams accepted the identification with the careful handling that 23 years of security experience had taught her to apply when dealing with documentation that might contain elements beyond her clearance level. The card appeared identical to standard airport employee credentials, but subtle differences in material composition and encoding patterns suggested federal authentication standards that exceeded civilian security protocols. The cargo facilities secure communication terminal processed Rose's identification through encrypted channels that connected directly to federal databases containing personnel records classified above Williams's access level. The response appeared within seconds, displaying contact information for a Department of Defense liaison office that operated 24 hours specifically for situations involving special operations personnel in civilian environments. Williams dialed the number with growing understanding that her routine security incident had intersected with classified operations that explained Rose's demonstrated capabilities and the federal agent's inability to identify her actual status through CONVENTIONL investigation methods. The voice that answered carried the professional authority of someone accustomed to resolving jurisdictional complications involving special operations assets. "This is Colonel Sarah Matthews, DOD Special Operations Liaison," the voice said through Williams's secure phone connection. "I understand you're dealing with an incident involving one of our personnel. Please provide your facility code and the authentication number displayed on your terminal." Williams complied with the information request while observing Rose's continued tactical positioning and the federal agent's obvious confusion regarding developments that exceeded their operational briefing. The cargo facility had become the center of classified authentication procedures that none of the original participants had been prepared to navigate. "Supervisor Williams," Colonel Matthews continued after verifying the security protocols, "the individual you're dealing with is conducting a classified assessment mission authorized at the highest levels of federal security oversight. Her actions were justified under operational parameters that take precedence over local law enforcement jurisdiction." The information transformed Williams's understanding of the entire incident, explaining Rose's capabilities while establishing federal authority that superseded air marshal jurisdiction within airport facilities. Her security training had included briefings on situations where classified personnel might be discovered during routine operations, but she had never encountered practical application of those protocols. Chun's radio communication with federal tactical units suddenly included information that modified their approach procedures and engagement authorization. The tactical commanders receiving his updates were connected to the same DOD liaison office that had authenticated Rose's status, creating coordination between agencies that operated at classification levels beyond air marshal clearance. Tactical Command, be advised that suspect identification has been verified through federal channels, Chun transmitted, his voice reflecting professional acceptance of circumstances that exceeded his original mission parameters. Request guidance on engagement protocols for friendly assets conducting classified operations. The response came through encrypted channels that bypass standard federal communication systems, indicating command authority that originated from Security levels where air marshal operations represented routine law enforcement rather than specialized tactical capability. Federal tactical units received stand-down orders that prioritized operational security over traditional law enforcement procedures. Foster and Torres remained in restraint positions that prevented their interference with authentication procedures, while ensuring their safety during resolution of jurisdictional complications that their training hadn't prepared them to handle. Their federal weapons remained secured, but their tactical communication equipment had been modified to receive classified briefings regarding Rose's actual mission status. Williams concluded her conversation with Colonel Matthews after receiving instructions that established new protocols for the remainder of Rose's assignment at Denver International Airport. The federal liaison officer had provided authorization codes that granted Rose enhanced access to airport security systems while requiring modification of her cover identity to prevent future encounters with federal personnel operating without appropriate briefing. "Ma'am," Williams said to Rose, her tone reflecting the respectful deference appropriate for addressing classified personnel whose operational authority exceeded civilian security supervision. "I've been instructed to provide whatever support you require for completion of your mission here. The federal agents will be briefed on your status to prevent similar incidents." Rose's response incorporated appreciation for Williams's professional handling of classified authentication while maintaining operational security requirements that limited detailed discussion of mission parameters in environments where unauthorized personnel might overhear sensitive information. "I appreciate your assistance, Supervisor Williams," Rose replied. "My mission here will continue for approximately 2 more weeks, after which I'll be reassigned to other facilities for similar assessment operations." The federal agents demonstrated exactly the kind of security awareness that my evaluation was designed to measure. The statement provided context for the entire incident while explaining why Rose's presence at Denver International had attracted federal attention through behaviors that exceeded expectations for temporary logistics personnel. Her mission involved testing airport security through controlled infiltration that evaluated personnel training and threat detection capabilities. Chun approached Williams with questions about procedural modifications that would accommodate Rose's continued presence while preventing future jurisdictional conflicts between federal agencies operating at different classification levels. His 12 years of federal experience had included encounters with special operations personnel, but never in civilian environments where operational protocols required coordination with local authority structures. Supervisor Williams, Chun, said carefully, "What procedures should federal personnel follow when we encounter classified operations that we haven't been briefed on? Our training emphasizes threat identification, but this situation suggests gaps in our preparation for friendly asset recognition." Williams consulted documentation provided by Colonel Matthews that established new protocols for federal agents operating in airports where classified assessment missions might be conducted without local briefing. The procedures emphasized coordination through DoD liaison offices rather than independent investigation of personnel whose backgrounds exceeded federal clearance levels. Federal tactical units that had surrounded the cargo facility received updated mission parameters that transformed their emergency response into security support for ongoing classified operations. Their tactical capabilities would be redirected toward perimeter protection that maintained operational security while Rose completed her assessment mission without further federal interference. The cargo facility's security cameras had recorded authentication procedures that would be reviewed by federal investigators trained to identify special operations indicators through behavioral analysis and tactical proficiency evaluation. The footage would contribute to improved training protocols for federal agents, whose assignments might involve contact with classified personnel in civilian environments. Torres and Foster were released from restraint positions with understanding that their encounter with Rose had provided valuable training in threat assessment and tactical limitations that federal programs hadn't adequately addressed. Their experience would contribute to enhanced federal education regarding special operations capabilities and engagement protocols for friendly assets. Airport operations resumed normal scheduling as federal tactical units established discrete security positions that maintained operational support without disrupting civilian freight operations or passenger services. The incident had been resolved through diplomatic channels that preserved both airport functionality and mission security for ongoing classified assessment operations. Rose Miller returned to her workstation with authorization to continue manifest verification while conducting the comprehensive security evaluation that had brought her to Denver International Airport. Her mission parameters had been modified to include coordination with federal personnel who now understood her actual status and operational objectives, preventing future encounters that might compromise either airport security or classified assessment operations. The debriefing room at Denver International Airport's Federal Security Wing had never hosted a meeting quite like the one scheduled for 0800 hours the following morning. Air Marshals Chun, Torres, and Foster sat across from a conference table that separated them from Colonel Sarah Matthews, who had arrived from DoD headquarters to conduct comprehensive analysis of the cargo facility incident and its implications for federal training protocols nationwide. Colonel Matthews reviewed documentation that quantified the tactical engagement through frame-by-frame analysis of security footage, medical assessment of the Air Marshals' injuries, and detailed evaluation of Rose Miller's demonstrated capabilities during what had become a case study in the limitations of conventional federal law enforcement training when confronted with special operations expertise. "Gentlemen," Colonel Matthews began, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose career had included oversight of classified operations where tactical proficiency determined mission success rather than administrative compliance. "Your encounter with Agent Miller has provided valuable data regarding gaps in federal training that could prove problematic in operational environments where similar capabilities might be encountered among hostile actors." Chun shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his 12 years of federal experience providing no preparation for evaluation by military personnel whose classification levels exceeded his access clearance. The previous day's encounter had forced him to reconsider assumptions about threat assessment and tactical preparedness that had guided his entire career in federal law enforcement. Torres maintained professional composure despite obvious discomfort regarding her performance during tactical engagement with someone whose capabilities had exceeded every parameter in federal training protocols. Her 6 years of federal service had included advanced courses in high-threat response, but none had prepared her for contact with individuals possessing special operations backgrounds. Foster, whose inexperience had initiated the physical confrontation that revealed fundamental gaps in federal tactical education, struggled with implications that extended beyond personal embarrassment to questions about institutional preparedness for modern security challenges that conventional training might not address adequately. Agent Miller's mission at this facility involves comprehensive assessment of airport security vulnerabilities through controlled infiltration and personnel evaluation, Colonel Matthews continued. Your responses to her presence, your investigation methods, and your tactical engagement provided exactly the kind of data that her assessment was designed to gather. The statement reframed their encounter from security incident to training exercise, explaining why Rose's actions had been calibrated to test their capabilities rather than cause maximum damage to federal personnel who had approached her without understanding her actual operational status. Chun raised his hand tentatively. "Colonel, how were we supposed to identify Agent Miller as friendly personnel when her cover identity provided no indication of her actual background or mission status?" The question addressed fundamental challenges in federal operations where classified Personnel might be encountered during routine security activities, situations that required recognition protocols that balanced operational security with personnel safety for both military assets and federal law enforcement officers. That's precisely the problem Agent Miller's assessment was designed to identify, Colonel Matthews replied. Current federal training assumes that threats will be clearly identifiable through conventional indicators, but modern security challenges include scenarios where hostile actors possess capabilities that exceed your preparation parameters. Torres consulted her notes from the previous day's encounter. Colonel, Agent Miller's tactical capabilities suggested military special operations training. Are federal personnel expected to recognize and engage individuals with that level of expertise? The question highlighted training deficiencies that extended beyond individual performance to institutional preparedness for asymmetric threats that might utilize personnel with advanced military backgrounds for operations against civilian infrastructure, including airports, seaports, and other critical facilities. Agent Miller represents friendly assessment of your preparedness for exactly those scenarios, Colonel Matthews explained. Her background includes 7 years of special operations, experience in environments where failure meant strategic consequences. The techniques she demonstrated are now taught to hostile actors through various international training programs. Foster looked up from documentation he'd been reviewing. Colonel, are you saying that terrorists might have access to the same kind of training that Agent Miller used against us? The implications of Colonel Matthews' assessment extended beyond individual tactical encounters to strategic concerns about federal preparedness for threats that utilized military-trained personnel in civilian environments where conventional law enforcement might prove inadequate for effective response. Current intelligence indicates that several international organizations have recruited personnel with special operations backgrounds for operations against U.S. infrastructure, Colonel Matthews confirmed. Your encounter with Agent Miller provides baseline data for enhanced training programs designed to address those specific threats. The Air Marshals processed information that transformed their embarrassing tactical defeat into participation in national security assessment that would influence federal training protocols for years to come. Their experience had contributed to identification of training gaps that required immediate attention through enhanced education programs. Sean reviewed security footage from the cargo facility encounter on his tablet, noting tactical elements that his federal training had not prepared him to recognize or counter effectively. Colonel, what modifications would you recommend for federal training programs based on Agent Miller's assessment? The question initiated discussion of enhanced combat training, improved threat recognition protocols, and coordination procedures for encounters with classified personnel whose operational status couldn't be immediately verified through conventional identification methods. Agent Miller's preliminary recommendations include integration of advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques, enhanced situational awareness training, and modified engagement protocols for individuals demonstrating capabilities that exceed civilian expectations, Colonel Matthews said, consulting classified documentation that detailed specific training modifications. Torres asked about timeline and resource requirements for implementing enhanced training programs that would address deficiencies identified through Rose's assessment mission. Her professional interest reflected recognition that improved capabilities would benefit federal personnel facing increasingly sophisticated threats. Implementation will begin within 60 days at federal training facilities nationwide. Colonel Matthews replied, your facility has been selected as a pilot location for enhanced programs, and Agent Miller will serve as primary instructor for advanced tactical training that exceeds current federal standards. Foster's expression suggested both anticipation and apprehension regarding additional training with someone who had demonstrated such comprehensive tactical superiority during their previous encounter. His experience had provided education in humility that conventional federal training programs couldn't replicate through classroom instruction. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering operational procedures, security protocols, and training modifications that would result from Rose's assessment of federal preparedness at Denver International Airport. The Air Marshals learned that their encounter represented one component of nationwide evaluation designed to improve federal capabilities through practical testing rather than theoretical exercise. Colonel Matthews concluded the briefing with information about Rose's continued presence at the airport and coordination procedures that would prevent future jurisdictional conflicts while allowing completion of her classified mission. The federal agents would serve as test subjects for enhanced training protocols that addressed capabilities gaps identified through their tactical engagement. "Gentlemen," Colonel Matthews said as the meeting concluded, "your encounter with Agent Miller has contributed to national security improvements that will benefit federal personnel throughout the United States. Your willingness to learn from this experience will influence your careers and potentially save lives in future operational scenarios." As the 3 air marshals left the debriefing room, they carried with them understanding that their embarrassing defeat had served purposes extending far beyond individual education to institutional improvement that would enhance federal preparedness for modern security challenges requiring capabilities beyond conventional law enforcement training. Rose Miller continued her assessment mission with enhanced cooperation from federal personnel who now understood her actual role and operational objectives. But her work at Denver International Airport was far from complete. The data she'd gathered would influence security policies affecting airports throughout the United States, and her training programs would modify federal capabilities for generations of law enforcement officers who might face similar challenges. In operational environments, 6 months after the cargo facility incident, the Advanced Federal Training Center at Denver International Airport buzzed with activity that would have been unimaginable before Rose Miller's assessment mission revealed critical gaps in national security preparedness. The converted warehouse that had once housed routine freight operations now served as a specialized facility where federal agents from across the United States came to receive instruction in capabilities that conventional law enforcement training had never addressed. Rose stood before a class of 24 federal agents, including Chen, Torres, and Foster, who had volunteered to serve as assistant instructors after completing enhanced training protocols that transformed their understanding of tactical engagement and threat assessment. The 3 air marshals who had once attempted to detain a quiet logistics worker now demonstrated techniques that exceeded their original federal training by margins that impressed visiting military observers. The training facility incorporated lessons learned from Rose's comprehensive security assessment, which had identified vulnerabilities at 17 airports nationwide through similar controlled infiltration missions. Her final report to the Department of Defense contained recommendations that influenced federal policy at the highest levels of national security planning, establishing new standards for personnel training and facility protection that addressed modern threats requiring advanced response capabilities. "Today we'll be practicing threat recognition in civilian environments," Rose announced to the assembled agents, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose expertise had been validated through practical application rather than theoretical instruction. "You'll learn to identify individuals with advanced training while maintaining operational security and avoiding the jurisdictional complications that can compromise mission effectiveness." The curriculum she had developed integrated special operations techniques with federal law enforcement protocols, creating hybrid training that prepared agents for encounters with hostile actors possessing military backgrounds while preserving constitutional protections and legal compliance requirements that govern civilian law enforcement activities. Chun, now serving as Senior Training Coordinator, had earned certification in advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques that enabled him to provide realistic opposition during training exercises. His transformation from the air marshal who had been easily neutralized to an instructor capable of demonstrating sophisticated tactical concepts represented the potential for institutional improvement when proper training resources were applied systematically. The key principle, Chun explained to newer students, is that assumptions about individual capabilities based on appearance or apparent role can prove fatal in operational environments. Our encounter with Agent Miller taught us that threat assessment requires behavioral analysis rather than demographic profiling. Torres had specialized in surveillance detection and counterintelligence protocols that prepared federal agents for scenarios where hostile actors might infiltrate secure facilities through legitimate employment or contractor positions. Her expertise had expanded to include techniques for identifying special operations indicators through subtle behavioral cues that conventional training had never addressed. Watch for movement patterns that suggest tactical awareness, Torres demonstrated, showing video footage of various individuals moving through airport environments. Notice how Agent Miller's positioning allowed observation of multiple exit routes while maintaining appearance of routine work activity. These indicators can help you identify potential threats before they initiate hostile actions. Foster, whose inexperience had triggered the original confrontation, now taught courses in escalation management and tactical communication designed to prevent unnecessary conflicts with individuals whose backgrounds might include classified elements. His personal experience provided credibility that enhanced student learning through authentic examples of tactical decision-making under pressure. The enhanced training programs had produced measurable improvements in federal performance during simulated threat scenarios, with graduation rates exceeding previous standards by 43% and tactical proficiency scores, demonstrating capabilities that approached military special operations benchmarks. The success metrics validated Rose's assessment methodology, while establishing new standards for federal preparation. Airport security. Supervisor Patricia Williams had received promotion to Regional Security Director based on her professional handling of the classified authentication crisis and her subsequent coordination of enhanced training implementation. Her experience had established protocols for civilian security personnel who might encounter classified operations during routine facility management. Williams addressed the current training class about institutional cooperation between civilian and federal agencies. The lesson from Agent Miller's mission is that effective security requires coordination between all levels of personnel, from temporary contractors to federal agents to military special operations. No single agency possesses all the capabilities needed for comprehensive threat response. The broader implications of Rose's assessment had influenced security policy throughout the United States, with similar training facilities established at major airports, seaports, and other critical infrastructure locations. Federal agents nationwide now received instruction in advanced capabilities that prepared them for encounters with sophisticated threats that previous training programs had not adequately addressed. Colonel Sarah Matthews visited the Denver facility quarterly to evaluate training effectiveness and coordinate with other DoD assessment programs that continued Rose's work at installations throughout the country. Her oversight ensured that lessons learned from the cargo facility incident influenced broader military and civilian security cooperation. Agent Miller's assessment methodology has been adopted by NATO allies facing similar security challenges. Colonel Matthews announced during her latest facility visit, "The training protocols developed here are now being implemented internationally to address asymmetric threats that require enhanced federal capabilities." Rose's mission had evolved from individual facility assessment to institutional transformation that affected federal training across multiple agencies and international partners. Her techniques for identifying security vulnerabilities through controlled infiltration had become standard methodology for Evaluating personnel preparedness and facility protection. The 3 air marshals who had initiated her discovery through their attempted detention now serve as examples of professional growth and institutional adaptation. Their willingness to learn from tactical defeat and contribute to enhanced training demonstrated the potential for federal personnel to develop capabilities that exceeded original training parameters when provided with appropriate instruction and resources. We thought we were dealing with a temporary logistics worker who couldn't defend herself, Chun reflected during a training demonstration. Instead, we encountered someone whose capabilities forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about threat assessment and tactical preparedness. That encounter changed not just our careers, but federal training throughout the United States. The cargo facility where orange juice had once been spilled during a confrontation between federal agents and a quiet woman checking manifests had become a symbol of institutional learning and professional development. The incident that began with assumptions about civilian capabilities had resulted in enhanced federal preparedness for modern security challenges, requiring advanced tactical responses. Rose Miller continued her work with the Department of Defense, conducting security assessments at critical facilities, where her expertise in controlled infiltration and personnel evaluation contributed to national security improvements that protected American infrastructure from sophisticated threats. Her legacy at Denver International Airport would influence federal training for generations of agents who would face challenges requiring capabilities beyond conventional law enforcement preparation. The quiet woman who had once appeared to be just another temporary employee checking shipping documents had transformed federal law enforcement training through 63 seconds of tactical engagement that revealed the difference between assumptions and reality. Her mission had proven that effective security required recognition of capabilities rather than reliance on appearances, a lesson that now guided federal operations throughout the United States and beyond. At Denver International Airport, where millions of passengers continued to travel safely each year, federal agents trained with enhanced capabilities that prepared them for threats their predecessors could never have imagined. All because 3 air marshals had once made the mistake of underestimating someone whose background included experiences that their training had never addressed. The legacy of that encounter would continue to protect American security for decades to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.